Hey guys and gals, gentlemen, ladies, damas y caballeros, whatever. Welcome to another week in Appalachian History. And first off, I want to give a big shout out to a couple new patrons that joined us. Jessica Rodriguez and George McNair both joined this week and getting us a lot closer to that goal. I have a first original goal of 20. At that point, I'll be able to do a few things I haven't been able to do travel-wise. So getting closer, I'm about 4 away. So thank you so much for getting me that much closer. Thanks, Jessica and George. Thanks for joining the team. Very much appreciated, and appreciate anybody else that wants to join up. It would be a great, tremendous help to keep getting the word out and keep me on the road. But thank you guys again, and thanks to everybody out there who's sent some sort of financial donation. It's really helps more than you'll ever know. Thank you so much. I also want to deal with a letter I got this week from Scott Thomas. He's from Lexington, Kentucky. It had some artwork in it. You can see that, but I'll read a little bit of this for you. It says, "Hi, I just wanted to say I enjoy your channel. It's politics free, and that's a key. I'm tired of politics in everything. You can't do anything without politics. You can't even talk about the weather without somebody injecting something into it. So I'm like, well, I'm going to do my best to keep it out of here. I might tell you why people vote the way they do or think the way they do or whatever, but I'm not going to tell you how to or try to persuade you in any way. I just throw it out there because that's what I like to hear. And God knows I search out Appalachian stuff all the time, and everybody has an agenda. They've got some kind of thing they're trying to push, or they're sponsored by somebody who's paying them with some kind of motive under it. So I'm like, you won't get that here, folks. That's why I call this Real Appalachia. Just good, bad, and ugly. But anyway, it's politics free and presents Appalachia, or part of it, as is. Too many videos on Appalachia dwell on the negatives. Yeah, there's problems, so what place doesn't have problems? There's also an incredible amount of good, far outweighing the bad. That's been my experience anyway. Very true. Very, very, very true. Good, bad, and ugly is, I think I called that last video that last week, but it's exactly what's in the history of this week. You know, that's just part of everywhere. There's good, bad, and ugly. It just depends on what you try to focus on. Got a lot of heat. 3 or 4 years ago, I went to New York City and I brought back all these ugly pictures of New York City, and we did a satire video. You can find it on the old Appalachian Project channel, still. I think it's Hillbillies for Humanity or something. It was a joking satire making fun of how when you go anywhere with a certain mindset, and you'll find what you're looking for. Because I showed all these terrible, ugly pictures of New York City as if it was poor, horrible place and that Appalachia was perfect. Because we thought it was funny. My friend Jason Barton, we did that together, and we thought it was hilarious because how many people come into Appalachia and looking for only poverty or the worst thing they can find, and suddenly, boom, that's all you see. They don't show the good parts of it. So we thought that was funny, but boy, I took a lot of heat for that because people took it seriously and tried to talk about the great culture of New York City. I'm like, are you kidding me? I love New York City. I just thought it was funny. Most people didn't get the joke, but I still like it. It's still out there. Get back to Scott. Most of my family are from Clay County, Kentucky. I've never lived there, but spent a lot of time there from the mid-'70s to early '90s. I never had a minute's trouble, not from the people anyway. Weather was the main source of grief. I met a lot of wonderful people, none of the stereotypes most people have of Eastern Kentucky. Absolutely true. One thing that stands out in my memory about Clay County is the number of ghost stories I heard over the years. Almost everyone I talked to there knew a ghost story or 3. And what local places had haunts. I'm not a big believer in paranormal, but I love a good ghost story. Later, Scott. Now that's so funny that they would touch on this, because a lot of my earlier videos on the Appalachian Project, I went to a lot of haunted places. I went to Sensabaugh Tunnel. My book, Legends and Lore of East Tennessee, has got a lot of that type of thing in it. I went to the Bethesda Cemetery in Morristown. I've been to all these places trying to chase this stuff. And the Major Graham Mansion in Whitfield, all these things are coming back to me as I'm talking, but I've been Octagon House in Marion. I've been to tons and tons and tons and tons, and I've never saw one thing. If there's ever a human on the face of God's green earth who was less of a believer in ghosts than me, up to a couple months ago, I don't know where you have to go to find them. I had no belief in it until I had my own experience. So I go to a friend's house, and I don't want to get too graphic with any of this stuff, but needing to go to the bathroom, had a Diet Coke too many or something, and the bathroom was taken, and there's only one bathroom in this particular place. So like a good Appalachian man, go off on the back porch and go out there and start up, and next thing you know, I look over in the corner and I see this white haze, and I thought, man, that's strange. And so I looked over, and whatever I looked at, I couldn't quite come into focus. It was in shape of looked like a body torso type thing, And I still just didn't believe it. I thought it was fog or some kind of weird lighting, and I looked around, there was nothing there for it to be. So I looked again, and I was like, then I kind of got getting a little spooked, just to be honest. I hate to admit that. But so I, like sometimes you see a scared dog do. I looked straight ahead and tried not to make contact with it. And that thing moved right in front of me. And then it rose right above my head. And it was still, when I'd look at it, I could not get it into focus. It kind of like separated. I could see everything in my peripheral vision, could see that it was the form of a body. But when I looked directly at it, I'd see right through it. And then it rose above my head. And it felt like, to me, it was sending me the messages, yes, I'm exactly what you think I am. And here I am. And what are you going to do about it? So I was petrified. And I was white as the ghost. And so I go back in, and I couldn't even talk about it. I thought, hey, this is weird. How do you just come back from going out to pee and come back in here and talk about ghosts? So I kept my mouth shut, but it was pretty obvious that something had gone on with me. So they started asking me, you okay? So then I unloaded the ghost story, and next thing you know, sure enough, somebody else who lived in that house had the similar experience. So apparently it is notorious. And to add on top of that, there is a couple of bodies buried in that yard. So I don't know which one it was, the man or the woman, but I had my first ghost experience, and I'm a true believer now. I am convinced, after 50 years, I do believe in ghosts. So there's your answer, Scott. I believe, I'm a believer. So I need a drink of water after that. It brought back bad memories. Most of you are not here for this. You're here for history. So let's get into it. Starting February 22nd. A man named Roy Roberts was born in 1943 in Livingston, Tennessee. He's a blues musician who's played with Stevie Wonder, played with Otis Redding, and he even dabbled into country music a little bit. But he worked on a farm at the age of 14 to buy his first guitar. It was one of those old Sears Silvertone guitars, which was their house brand. So he worked on that farm to build up to get the guitar, which I thought was a cool story. So Roy is still active, and he is out there even today making music for us. Another person born on that day was a man named Paul Dooley. And Paul Dooley was born in 1928 in Parkersburg, West Virginia. And he is a character actor, and I could not believe all the TV shows this man has been on. He's been on a couple movies too. He was in 16 Candles. He's the voice of Sarge in Cars 2 and Cars 3, those I guess it's Disney Pixar movies maybe. But he was on Bewitched, Get Smart, Captain Kangaroo, Golden Girls, Alf, let's see, Curb Your Enthusiasm, I said Golden Girls already, Criminal Law and Order, Criminal Intent. He's on CSI. He's on Grey's Anatomy. Bajillion TV shows. This is just barely scratching the surface of what I've always been on. He was even in the Popeye movie with Robin Williams back in the 1980s. So this guy has been in tons. And when I saw his face, I was like, oh, I know this guy. But I had no clue that I had never realized how many times I've probably seen him, because I've watched all those shows to some degree. But that's Paul Dooley, and he is 93 years old, and he was still active as of at least 2019. So he's still out there with us and trying to entertain us even today. So, moving right along to February the 23rd, a man named Freddie Langdon was born in 1922, and he was a world champion fiddle player. And he was born in Annville, Kentucky. Not Anvil. Maybe it's Anvil, but it's Annville, Kentucky. And he worked with a lot of country musicians, from Kenny Price, Bonnie Lou. So he worked with them. Said he was a great fiddle player, but he also sang backup for James Brown. James Brown was on King Records, which was a weird amalgamation of country musicians, and also had James Brown and had all kinds of eclectic mix of musicians. So Freddie Langdon actually even sang backup for James Brown, which I think is a really cool thing for an Appalachian to do, like James Brown. Moving on to February the 24th, Tom Burleson was born in 1952 in Crossnore, North Carolina. And Tom Burleson grew up to be 7 foot 2 inches tall. He played basketball at NC State for the Wolf Pack. And he was a very interesting story about him that I did not know until this very day. He was in Munich during the 1972 Olympics. He was part of the Olympic basketball team. And if you remember anything about that one, that is the one where there was the hostage situation where the Palestinian terrorists took these Israeli athletes hostage and ended up, unfortunately, executing them. And Tom Burleson was the last person to see those, or to have any kind of encounter with those Israelis because he was actually held at gunpoint by the terrorists, and they told him not to move and not to look or make any kind of contact with those Israelis as they passed by, or they would shoot him. So not only did he deal with that, and then, which can you imagine? I mean, I'm sure to this day he would still have flashbacks and terrible memories from that. But so not only that, they also was the year of tremendous controversy where there was this last second play where Russia got multiple attempts to win the game and ended up pulling off this tremendously controversial win over the U.S. in basketball, and it resulted in the Olympic basketball men's team refusing to accept the silver medal. So they just walked away. It felt like they were cheated and ripped off, and it's still to this day a really bitter memory. So he was very much involved in that. He came back after that and won a national championship with NC State, the Wolfpack, in 1974. So their basketball team won the national championship. He was drafted 3rd overall in the NBA and ended up playing for 7 years. He was drafted by the Seattle Supersonics, so he played with them. He played for the Kansas City, I can't remember what their team was named. Kansas City Kings, I believe, maybe where they were, because I think they're Sacramento Kings now. And then the Atlanta Hawks, which, oddly enough, I'm representing my favorite team there now, Atlanta Hawks. So Tom Burleson. And an interesting side note for me was my dad ran into him at the Statesville car auction a few years back. Imagine what it looked like, a 7'2" guy walking through there. But Tommy Burleson from NC State. Moving on to the 25th. Oh, the good doctor, Ralph Stanley, was born in 1927 in McClure, Virginia, which is in Dickinson County. A little community called Big Spraddle. And he was part of the Stanley brothers with his brother Carter. That's where they really got started. But, you know, he was known, he talked about when he was younger, I've heard some interviews where his dad had no musical ability, and his mother actually taught him how to play the banjo. He had this clawhammer style and that she taught him because her family was musically inclined. And so she taught Ralph that, and Ralph and his brother Carter formed the Carter Brothers. And they also had the Clinch Mountain Boys that played with them, which was another band. And they got started in 1946. They had a style too, is heavily influenced by a Primitive Baptist church that they attended. And oddly enough too, I had a next door neighbor in Richlands that drove all the way to Clintwood to that Primitive Baptist church because there's just not that many around, even now. And he would go over there and he attended church with Ralph Stanley. So that was pretty a cool thing, because Richlands to Clintwood, about an hour-and-a-half drive, the best you can do. And it's a rough drive, because I actually worked at the Wachovia Bank in Clintwood for a while when I lived in Richlands. And you talk about brutal, I did that every day for about a year. And I met Ralph Stanley when I was down there because he was raising money for his museum then. I never saw him play live, I'm ashamed to say, but I did meet him, and he's a heck of a nice guy. But they got their start in Norton on WNVA, and then they moved to WCYB here in Bristol, Virginia, and they played on the Farm and Fun Time show that was a pretty big deal back then, and that's where they really grew into their performance. And so that I think they played on that off and on for about 12 years, and then unfortunately Carter passed away in 1966 from cirrhosis. So that left Ralph trying to decide whether he wanted to continue on with the music career, because, you know, obviously him and his brother were very close, and he just did not feel the same for him. So he took some time off, did some soul searching, and thankfully for us and the world, he came back and reformed the Clinch Mountain Boys. And so he went back out and started playing music again. He ended up, and that's another reason why we can thank Mr. Dr. Ralph, was he ended up hiring both Ricky Skaggs and Keith Whitley, the late great Keith Whitley, to work for him. He discovered both of those guys, and really, you know, obviously, you know, Ricky Skaggs and Keith Whitley died way too soon, but had some of the best songs, the best country songs that you'll ever hear back in, I guess it was the late 80s. I don't think he lived in the 90s, but maybe, yeah, I'm thinking he passed away in the late 80s, maybe 90. But so Ralph Stanley he stayed around. He was always a legend in bluegrass, but he really got elevated nationally when the movie Oh Brother, Where Art Thou came out in 2000. So that took him to a whole another level, even at his advanced age. And so that ended up resulting in him getting a Grammy too in 2002 for Best Male Country Vocal Performance And so that was one of the highlights of his career. And he got all kinds of awards. He was given an honorary doctorate degree from LMU, Lincoln Memorial, in 1976. That's where he was originally called Dr. Ralph Stanley. He ended up getting another one in 2014 from Yale University. He was called named a Library of Congress living legend. He's a member of the Grand Ole Opry. At the time of his death, he was the oldest living member. He outlived little Jimmy Dickens by a little bit little Jimmy Dickens passed away just a few months before Dr. Ralph did. And he was in the National Bluegrass Hall of Honor. He wrote an autobiography, and I'll put a link to that in case somebody's interested in purchasing that, called Man of Constant Sorrow. I think it came out in 2009, and it's available on Amazon, so I'll give a link to that if somebody's interested in reading his life story. And of course, there's the Ralph Stanley Museum that I alluded to earlier. It's down in Clintwood that you're certainly encouraged to check out. It's a very impressive building, so I encourage everyone. Maybe I'll go down there and do a video sometime. Maybe they'll invite me down. I can do that. That'd be great. I'd love to check that out and let y'all guys know a little bit about what you can do there. Unfortunately, moving into the last of this week, last 3 days is filled with bad news and tragedy. On February 26th, there was the Buffalo Creek disaster. I want to think that, I didn't write the year down, but I want to say it's 1972. I'm almost positive. But what it was a coal slurry dam that was owned by Piston Coal Company. And it burst and it flooded out 16 coal towns in southern West Virginia along Buffalo Creek. And it ended up killing 125 people. It injured 121. It left 4,000 people homeless. 507 houses were destroyed, and 44 mobile homes were destroyed, and 30 businesses. So it was a devastating. And and the dam had just been deemed as satisfactory by a federal mine inspector just 4 days before this terrible tragedy happened. Piston tried to have it declared an act of God, and so that went over like a crocheted bathtub, as you can imagine. Really added to the anger of local people that they were not taking responsibility for the terrible tragedy. So there was 2 different commissions that were investigating it, and they ended up getting sued by the state of West Virginia for $100 million, and somehow they ended up settling for a measly $1 million. I'm trying to look up what year that was, because I hate when I don't give you the accurate facts here. But they settled for $1 million with the state of West Virginia, and they were also sued by some of the survivors. Okay, yeah, it did happen 1972. I was right. I thought I was right, but hey, not knowing. So around 625 survivors, approximately, sued Piston for $64 million. And they ended up settling in 1974 for $13.5 million, which ended up being a measly $13,000 per individual. Even in today's money, it would only be, I want to say, about $40-some thousand. So that isn't a lot for all the devastation that they went through. Another suit was filed by 348 child survivors, and it settled for $4.8 million. So they got even less per person. There was a miracle baby that came out of this, and I just saw him interviewed. I looked it up on YouTube a little while ago, and his name was Kerry Lee Albright, and he survived. Like I said, he's called the miracle baby. His mother, the last possible second, threw him to the banks to safety as she got washed away and drowned. And so he survived, and just again a miracle. And it was really cool to see him talk about that. He'd suffered some pretty some injuries back then, but he's pretty much completely healed at this point. And the interview, you can find it on YouTube actually. He talks a little bit about how his dad had to learn how to be the mother too, and take care of him, learn how to cook and clean and do all these things. And so I really respected that. And it's like his dad turned out to be a saint, and obviously what more could anybody do for you than lay their life down for you. So I really think a lot of his mother as well. Moving on to February 27th. Thought it would be the date of the Boissevain mine disaster in 1932, and it was a mine owned by the Pocahontas Fuel Company in Boissevain, which was in Tazewell County, Virginia. Ended up killing 38 coal miners, and out of 50 on that shift. So it was a very devastating, and all but 7 of those miners had widows. So you're talking about left behind 31 widows, and God only knows how many children were left without a father. So it was a devastating disaster, to say the least. And moving on to the 28th of February, back in 1958, it was the day of the Prestonsburg Bus Disaster. And I've written about this on our website. You can check that out at appalachiantalk.org. That's appalachiantalk.org, yes. I wrote about this before, and it was just an absolutely horrid event where this school bus in Prestonsburg, Kentucky, of course, in Floyd County, went off and slid off an embankment, and it ended up killing 26 students and the bus driver, so 27 people in total. And it was just, they went into the big sandy river, and there's all kinds of witnesses describing people, kids scrambling to try to get off of it, and just a horrifying scene. Gosh, it was the most hardest to reconcile in your mind. It's the worst case scenario for anything that could possibly happen to your children, and just to think that did happen. Again, you're welcome to read that on our website. There's a little bit more detail and that type of thing. And also there was a documentary about it that I think his name is Kevin Crisp put out. It's called The Very Worst Thing, because that was a quote by someone in the newspaper. The very worst thing that ever happened in Floyd County, I believe, is what the lady had said. And again, that was just a terrible accident. And ever since reading that too, I've always thought, I will never, ever, you'll never catch me complain when they call school off. I don't care. If it's too quick, fine. I'd much rather that happen than take any kind of risk with children, because there's no replacement for your child. There's more days in a year to make that school up, or you can do whatever you got to do, especially these days with Zoom and everything else. But oddly enough, the Stanley brothers, the aforementioned Ralph Stanley and Carter Stanley, wrote a song called No School Bus in Heaven, for referencing that tragedy. And that pretty well wraps up this week. I hope you guys, I don't even want to use the word enjoy. Those last 3 things were pretty crappy. I hope you tolerated it this week and learned something this week. But we'll be back next week, and hopefully there'll be some better news to go with it, because that's depressing. Now I'm going to have to eat some candy or something to get myself in a good mood. Thanks for watching.